we have a panel discussion. During this panel discussion, we are going to discuss several questions, and one of them, why does it feel that there is a pushback from providers and payers to the idea of introducing AI ML in healthcare? So, Ajay, Alex, and Brian, if you would like to reply to this question, feel free to join.
Sure. I'll go ahead and kick it off, and I'm sure my colleagues here on the phone also have plenty of examples here. I think that the big why does it feel like there's pushback, I think also was tied to the question that was asked of Brian of have you had pushback? I think in general, the answer is why does it feel like there's pushback from providers and payers? I think there's a segmentation here of people who are clinical versus people who are non-clinical that live in these organizations. So there is a rise in these types of organizations where they now have departments of data science. They have large teams for analytics. And those personas are obviously a little bit easier to have the conversation because they understand the work that goes behind the AI ML. And I think that's the theme behind why there could be pushback is those that are pushing back don't have a clear understanding of what's underneath the hood of an AI ML model. And if you especially think about the clinicians, where I think this is where we see the largest amount of pushback, is not really a pushback around they don't agree with the idea or they don't believe in it or they don't like someone telling them what to do. It's more around the fact that these are people who have spent 15 years or more trying to learn the ins and outs of how the human works from a clinical standpoint. So if they have an understanding of those, let's say, clinical science, they now need to have that understanding of that on the data and analytics side. So for me, when I worked at my first AI ML startup, Narrative DX, like I said, we were natural language processing. So you're now going to tell people that you have the ability, you have a tool that has the ability to say, we analyze patient comments and tell you exactly what are the key findings from that. You can't just simply say that our accuracy model is 96%, 98%. You need to begin to start thinking about levels deeper into so that they understand the journey that you took. They just took a journey to become physicians, become nurses. They need to understand that journey and how it's really tying to the work you've done to make the model proper, as well as how it ties to their world. So we would actually show a visual of a comment. We would say very simply, the comment that a patient leaves is, my nurse was great, my food was cold. To be able to show them that a simple sentence like that actually from NLP can generate two insights, one about the nurse, one about the food. It actually has the ability to show them that there's a positive about the nurse, there's a negative about the food. And it is important that sometimes I think there's a depth of how far you need to go, whether you need to go down to the model itself or begin to show examples of how you're iterating off of the data to show them the value. And I think that was a big thing in Alex's example was you started off with these anomalies. Then what you got into was talking to the physician, you're including some of their knowledge to then refine it and to then it was the age, then it was the amount of days that they were on the medication. Now you have brought them along. They understand some consciousness of what you're building in this model. Because I'll be very honest, when I started off in healthcare consulting, we did not have AI ML at the breadth that it was today. Even just showing a physician their infection rates or how much they're ordering CT scans or X-ray scans. There's pushback even to that, not because they have a problem with someone showing them data. They have no idea what even basic math of the numerator and the denominator is. Once you explain that, you're able to then refine that information more based on some of their information, based on the insights that they know, and they do trust the data. To me, I always tell any entrepreneur, anybody who's a scientist, if you are talking about your data models, or if you're talking about AI ML to a bunch of physicians, and they ask 0 questions, that's actually when you have a problem. You want them to have questions, you want them to have pushback, and what you need to be able to do is begin to start at the high level and go granular level by level until those physicians begin to say, I understand how this works and how it's tied to the day-to-day of my function.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, I can confirm every Ajay's word. I felt that a couple of times, the pushback. The first example was the anomaly detection. The second project I didn't talk today about was about readmissions. And actually, we've got a pushback on that because, first of all, as Ajay mentioned, the clinical team, they didn't understand what we did and why should they trust it. So, and for us, it was very hard to explain what the results mean. We stuck at the story, what is the area under curve and what is the receiver operator curve. So it's a relatively easy math for data scientists because they spent like 5-10 years learning those concepts, but it's impossible to explain to doctors because they barely understand what accuracy is. And when you try to explain them that you can have like 99% accuracy just by having skewed sample of data, that also makes them sad. And this is the part of the story why accuracy is a bad metric for unbalanced data sets, which was a part of the story, and it was a case, and it was very hard to explain them why F1 score is better than accuracy and what is F1 score. So yeah, it was hard to explain, but charts helped us, and actually, I learned today from Ajay that we have to tell them a big picture, a story, and start not from the results, but much earlier. The second thing which we struggled with was the health plans are so rigid that they simply don't know what to do now. Okay, they've got a high-risk patients. What's next? They cannot deny a patient. It means when the patient comes to the clinic, we calculate the risk, and the risk is high. It means that something will for sure go wrong with this one. But the clinical team asks us what we have to do. What we have to do. We cannot deny him because it is not allowed by our program, and we cannot change the health plan because the insurance like already pay for him, and if we change a care plan, it will be at our own cost. And more importantly, that we responded that just to give more nurse attention to this one because it is severe case. The response was that nurses are already overloaded. They taking care about one nurse for like hundreds of beds, and it is simply impossible. So to this moment, I don't know what could they do.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Let's move to another question if Brian would like to join us as well. So, next question, how should one navigate the conversation of AI/ML with healthcare professionals? Ajay, could you reply?
Yeah, sure. So I think we talked a little bit about this in the last question too, but I think it goes into a very simple of you need to explain to them the work that I think there's two things. One is explaining the work and the fields that you're bringing into a model. Like I said, the example I guess the analogy I always say is like what's underneath the hood of the car. You do need to be able to share with them what that looks like, and it can range all the way from the model, like Brian was saying, like some of the actual details of the accuracy of the model and how that was structured, but it could also be just the accuracy and everything in between. I think one of the parts is the other part to navigate the conversation to me is you have to really understand the workflow that the clinicians and the healthcare professionals are going through. So a lot of times is what is really the pain point of the problem that you're trying to solve for, what is really the clinician's pain point. So if you begin to look at something like the company I was at, Orbita, which is a conversational AI company, we would talk about, we have chat bots, we have voice bots, and we come in and talk about all the value proposition. And at an executive level, they're very clear. They understand that there's a financial cost. But when you begin to start thinking about it at a clinician standpoint, how does this actually impact their world? So one, you need to be able to explain, obviously. So let's talk about let's talk about simply, like if we were to put a Alexa a voice device in a room, in a hospital room, allow the patient to be able to make requests to said voice bot. There's one level, obviously, of conversation of like, well, how accurate are the responses? So you need to do things like a pilot, a proof of concept, allow them to test, allow it to have. At every time, I always talk about allowing a prospect to have their hands on the product, let them see it and believe the accuracy in it. That's the best way you can sell what your model has done, the accuracy of your model. The second point, though, is to really say, technology is coming into healthcare in a large amount here. But one of the challenges that I think that we're facing in the healthcare market is, does this new technology add more work to what our professionals are already doing? And the idea is they don't need to get another tool that they have to work with. What you need to be able to see is, how does what I'm giving you work with? And I kind of look at it in two ways, in a few ways. Either it is removing work, it is augmenting the work, or it is optimizing the work. And you kind of have to try to figure out how you fit into those three areas, and specifically begin to understand at the ground level, is the problem that a hospital is facing. So if you talk about a voice bot in the room, well, you need to understand the workflows of how a nursing unit works. And you need to sit with the nurses to be able to ask the questions on what type, with this product came to market here, would you like this? How would it benefit you? What are your current issues today? And you're getting that qualitative analysis where nurses will begin to tell you things like, my biggest issue is half the requests that I am dealing with from a patient are things that somebody else in the hospital can deal with. I don't need to go get the food from them. I don't need to do the cleanup. Actually, the issue that I run into as a nurse is patient makes a request about me needing to clean, about their room being too cold. I have to then go call someone to go fix the air conditioning. Why can't it just be routed directly to the person who needs to fix the air conditioning or the heat? So when you begin to get to that level of conversation, and then you're able to share with them that adding in those type of features into an AI ML world or product are very small incremental changes that will still have large benefit, that helps them build a trust. You basically need to bring them along the journey. I say that in sales is, meet a customer where they are along that digital health AI ML journey. Where are they in that journey? And you need to meet them there.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. So
Cool. That's
yeah.
super insights. I have to agree. I want to mention that care specialists, they are very conservative, and it's a great achievement to win their trust. It's a big work and great achievement, and then be very careful with that. They are doing first, they are doing, always remember that they're doing very hard work. They, most of the time, they are exhausted in the evening. And how you can win at least a part of their trust is emphasize on their pains and how your tool can handle them. As Ajay said, doctors hate paperwork and like cleaning toilets, and nurses like hate cleaning toilets. Tell them how your tool will help them. Start from this, not about technology, accuracy, and other things. It is very common bias of technical specialists, including me. I talk about how cool the model is, what technical performance it has, but it is not what may take their attention.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We have another question, and it's connected to pandemic. Will the adoption of AI ML be accelerated with the pandemic? Ajay?
Yeah, so I think that the short answer is yes, it will be accelerated. But again, what I will caution is it's not something that's going to happen overnight. There is a lot more conversation around needing to bring in AI ML. So what I will say is there will be an acceleration for the desire, but that also is going to be met with an increase in the pushback. Not to say that it's not something that you should do, but needing to explain and understand where it fits in. And to be honest, that's really where there's still a lot of discovery happening on where can AI ML go in. I go into a lot of health systems on a weekly basis, and they will say, well, we're thinking about doing AI ML. And the question is, well, what are you trying to solve? That is the root question I'll have. So yes, there will be an increase, but I preface it as there still needs to be a lot of discovery of what that is. I think in healthcare, the knowledge of what is AIML is still a big lift, but I don't want to say that as a discouraging point that it's still a lift. They're appreciative of people having the conversation, explaining how it's being done, but understanding what they're trying to solve for is something that I would even say, even you all on the phone need to be considering is, what either if I am at a hospital and on this call, what am I trying to solve for? If I am a scientist, what should I be trying to solve for? And if you're an entrepreneur, what does the market to kind of dictate that you should try to solve for? So there'll be an acceleration. I think the part though is taking the time to still understand where does it fit in. So I think, from the 5 areas that we talked about, and I think Brian gave an example around analytics, Alex gave an example around analytics. So I think it's safe to say, as 3 people mentioned data and analytics, AIML is definitely going to have a spot around analytics and an acceleration for it. Because I think one of the biggest challenges that was met during the pandemic was how do we do analysis to understand, at least in the US market, who are the populations most affected by this? Who are the populations that are most at risk for getting the COVID? Why are there certain types of people that are more prone to dying from the pandemic, from COVID-19? So that's where I think data and analytics right now, there's just not enough bodies and there's a lot of data that needs to be analyzed and AIML can accelerate that. So there'll be an acceleration, but I always caution that make sure that you're able to tell the story of how you're building that and what you're trying to solve.
From my side, I represent doers side, not a business, but a software engineering side. I can note 3 areas that start to boom after the pandemic 2 years ago. First is telemedicine. And the reason for all of them is the same. People don't want to meet other people because they spread the disease. That's understandable. So first area is telemedicine. This is because people don't want to go to the hospital, meet other people, and expose themselves to the risk of being sick. So the telemedicine startups, they are booming a large number. The field is growing. The second one is a remote analysis. People don't want to go to the lab, giving their blood or other things. They want to do it at home and send the analysis. And where AI and ML here is for telemedicine, it can, for example, from a video stream, it can already do some preliminary analysis of a patient, or track his behavior and detect misbehaviors, or track schedule of pill intake and dosages and correct the dosages and other things. For analysis, it's a biomarkers detection. Again, we can spot anomalies, we can analyze trends and many of the other things to automate analysis, not only make them remote, but also automate them. Another possibility which gives AIML to analysis is doing analysis with simple devices, which this simple analysis actually cannot do. Remember Tyrannos, the girl that promised to do everything from 1 drop of blood. Actually, it becomes more and more real because now we can substitute complex devices which destroys the sample with non-destructive photonic methods. Just put an infrared lighting on a sample, for example. It is just an example. In this way, we don't destroy the sample, the blood. You don't have to donate half a liter of your blood to do all the analysis and pay like 50,000 US dollars for the analysis. It will be cheap, fast, but technologies will be different. Equipment will be simpler, but the IML will substitute more complex equipment. The third area, unexpectedly, is genetics. The genetics was very hot at the beginning of the pandemic because the people and the governments were actively developing the vaccines from the COVID. To develop the vaccine, they have to understand the mechanism of the virus, where it attaches to the cell, how it is delivered to the nucleus, and other things, the mechanism. How it does it affect the genome or not? And me myself, I took part. We built a huge platform for a genomics data analysis, particularly for COVID severity prediction and detection and the factors which affected that. Yep. So to sum up, there are 3 areas in software engineering and AIML applied to that which are booming and that have been accelerated after the pandemic. First is telemedicine. Second is biomarkers discovery. And the third one is genomics and multi-omics. These are good insights, believe me, and save the slides of Ajay. Like you will save yourself like 20 years of life understanding the business.
Thank you for your reply, Alex. So we are going to the next, our last question. What advice can you provide startup leaders when embarking on AIML for healthcare? Ajay.
Sure. So I think the first thing is be passionate. Have passion in trying to solve something at the patient level. I think the biggest thing that we talk about in the healthcare industry is healthcare costs, at least in the US, have grown. And the pandemic has shown that costs have grown even more. And the challenges that we were facing prior to the pandemic were highlighted during the pandemic. Such things as healthcare in the US especially is dictated on how much you make and where you live and where your living conditions are, what we call health equity. This is something that people have talked about for years. The pandemic has accelerated this. The other part is one of the key things that has happened after the pandemic is prior to the pandemic, what we call providers, which are hospitals, payers who are the insurance companies, life science, pharma, they lived in silos. Pandemic has destroyed that. There is now an ecosystem where they have to talk to each other because at the end of the day, patient outcomes is the biggest part. And that's what we've learned. Outcomes are directly related to the cost. So first thing is be passionate about solving at the patient level. That's all that matters. I always say to entrepreneurs and startups, the best pitch or the best idea to think of is if your mother or your father were to go through this experience, how would you want them to go through it? That's really how I position it. The second part, I think, around the advice of the actual, I guess, nuts and bolts of it is begin to look at kind of not just the 5 categories, but really pay attention to what are the topics in the US, at least if you're talking about the US healthcare market, that people are talking about, where they're seeing acceleration. The third part of advice that I will say is there's a question I think I saw that came in around, can blockchain begin to help, potentially help with some of this data aggregation? Listen, I'll be very transparent with everybody in the call. When we talk about $1 trillion savings opportunity, that means there are primary fundamental challenges that have not been addressed. Data exchange being one of them in healthcare. And whether you use blockchain, AI, whatever it may be to help with that, that solves it. So I think the other part is, begin to really understand the market share and like I would say is understand the challenges people are trying to solve. If you are not talking to a provider, a payer, expand your network that way. Go talk to people who live this every single day. To me, when people ask me what was the benefit of being in consulting for healthcare, it was not traveling all over the country and all that. The benefit was that I get to start every day at 6 a.m. with physicians and nurses. And I got to stand by them while they were taking care of patients. And I got to really see the world through their eyes. Many of you who are on this call or in the US, if you're in your 30s or 40s, you are friends with people who are early physicians. Understand what their problems are. Immerse yourself in this industry, not just by listening to people like us. Go find people who are actually doing this every day and learn from them. Because I will tell you, for people who are surprised in the US that nurses have been quitting in record numbers, all those people clearly have never understood the industry. Because the fact is that these nurses, they were burnt out before the pandemic. They were overworked, the unions were not being supported, they were having all those challenges. This just accelerated it. So you need to be passionate, definitely understand the pain points. And the third one is spend time with the people that are in this because you are going to be an ally to them. You are solving their problems.
So I've been in the field for more than 10 years, particularly healthcare and life sciences. And I can confirm that Ajay just polled you the most hot topics. So if you're interested in a hot topic, just review his speech. It is very relevant. As for business, how can you validate your startup idea? There is a technology, it is a very well known, called business model canvas. If you don't know it, just Google before you starting any business and any idea. It includes two major steps. First is customer review, and the second is end user review, interview. Ajay just told about that in a simple words. I just formalize it. Talking to customers who will buy your solution and asking simple question: Do you need it? Do you need it? Do you need it? Will you use it? And to your end customers, what do you need? What do you need? If I had this thing, will it be valuable for you or not? Just ask questions, ask people, and you will see the real situation. Well, honestly, I hate reading books because books describing very past experiences, for example, how Steve Jobs become wealthy or how he did Apple. That's great, but it was like tens of years ago. It's not actual now. The world is different now. The environment is different. Your obstacles will be different. Go there, talk to people, go to real life, and good luck.